Hello, my name's Justin Brophy, and this is my presentation for Exam 3 for Fundamentals of Neuropsychology. So, the presentation is titled Stress and Anxiety and How Our Approach to Emotions Affects the Human Experience. So, in this presentation, I'm going to attempt to give kind of a holistic view and look at many different angles of how, what stress is and what anxiety is, and how our perception of emotions is going to change how we think about being human, and also about how we can deal with certain emotions that we may or may not want to have, like stress and anxiety, and then also how that contributes to us as humans. But while I'm going to try to give a broad view, I have chosen to focus on several things in particular. Now, finals week is probably the perfect time to give this presentation because we all experience stress during finals week. It's something that's, most everyone is dealing with a lot of tests, a lot of grades on the line, and they're trying to do well. And so it's something that everyone can kind of relate to. I think it's perfect timing to kind of do a presentation like this. Now, if I can get the slide to switch, here we go. So I want to open this with the question of what is stress and anxiety? So stress, is an emotion that we feel of just kind of being, well, there's many ways actually to think of stress itself, but in this context, stress and anxiety, like in the context of a finals week, is going to be kind of that worry about the future and about the work that you have to do. So there's many ways to look at the stress and anxiety, and I want to focus on the biological and the psychological viewpoints. So this right here is kind of the basic reductionist view and biological view of stress. So you've got on the right, or at least my right of the screen, is cortisol. So that's going to be released by the adrenal cortex, and in response to ACTH coming out of the pituitary gland, which obviously is in response to stimulation from the hypothalamus. That's going to circulate around. You're going to get all sorts of responses, which is essentially the stress response as it's been characterized in biology. But you can also look at this not just from a chemical standpoint. So this is the HPA axis. This is the chemical standpoint, but that's not, we don't feel and we don't experience cortisol. What we experience is this. We experience the HPA axis as this kind of dread, and just, this woman here is clearly having a hard time, and that's what we actually experience. So you can think of that as kind of what we as humans have, and in our mind, not just the chemicals that are going through our body and the axis that's controlling the regulation of those chemicals, but it's a real thing that we experience. So this is going to change how we look at certain things. So there are certain theories of emotion that have been brought up over time, and what these theories are, so two common ones that I want to focus on, is the James Lange theory and the Cannon-Bard theory. So the James Lange theory is kind of the theory that physiological changes arise, and those are what actually causes us to experience an emotion. So if you see in this picture, it's a bull, right? If a bull were charging you, the way that your stress reaction would work is that, perhaps something in your something that you see is going to affect your occipital cortex or whatever, and you're going to raise. What's important though is that your heart rate is going to raise. You're going to start sweating. Your veins are going to dilate, and then in response to that, your brain, your kind of higher functions, we can think of it, is going to be saying, oh wow, I'm very stressed out. Look at this physiological response that I have. I'm stressed, and then that's when you get that emotional response. The Cannon-Bard theory is not quite the opposite. I actually think I'm blocking part of that slide there, but it's not quite the opposite, but it is important to note the difference. Cannon-Bard focuses on how physiological changes kind of affect you subconsciously, that when you see a stimulus, it affects you kind of subconsciously, and your physiological and your emotional response, one is not the cause of the other. They happen at the same time, but what's important to note about the Cannon-Bard theory is that even though they happen at the same time, they're separate. So you have a separate emotional response and a separate physiological response. Now, these theories of emotion can be really, really helpful to us to have. They give us, here it says a target, and that's in parentheses because I don't want to sound too reductionist in saying like it's a drug target, but they do give us something, and also target kind of insinuates something to be taken out, which emotions aren't that way, but they do give us an idea of how these emotions could function, and then based off of those hypotheses, things that we could do to improve it. So if we think about emotions and we think about someone like Witty Ticky Ray, so Witty Ticky Ray kind of has a twofold part to his Tourette's. And when Dr. Sachs actually sets about to think about, talk with Ray about life that he could have outside of Tourette's, it requires this twofold approach, which wouldn't really be possible without the theories of emotions. And so he puts him on Haldol, so that's gonna control the physiological response, but he also needs to address kind of that mental side in our mind, as humans, not just in the brain, but our mind, address the issue of, well, does he want to, and is he prepared to live without Tourette's? So this is not, Tourette's is a little bit different than emotion, but emotion is heavily, heavily involved in Witty Ticky Ray's life. And you can see here there's that kind of twofold approach to the physiological and the mental side that wouldn't be possible without these theories of emotions. So those are some of the advantages, but they also have some drawbacks. So the biggest drawback with these theories of emotion is that they kind of fundamentally separate the human person into two distinct concepts of kind of the physiological, the material, and then kind of the mind, but the mind in an immaterial sense. And they separate those two. And the thing is that our experiences don't work like that. I mean, I don't walk into a final and, my mental state is just a neutral while my body starts, sweating and, weak at the knees. And then all of a sudden my mind says, oh, I must be stressed out. It doesn't work like that. I mean, and I don't experience it the other way around either. I don't think about that and then my body responds to, some abstract mind. No, it's something that's present to me and that I experience for myself as I'm going in there, both in my mind and my body. And so this kind of idea of splitting the emotions is a bit dangerous to the idea of humanity because we are, we're not separated like that. So what I want to talk about then after this is how we can better understand humanity as what we are, and then how that what that teaches us about emotions and things like stress. So to do that, I kind of want to take this to a bit of a philosophical place because I think it is very important to have some philosophy in this discussion. So here we have a picture of St. Thomas Aquinas, and Thomas Aquinas was, one of the greatest one of the greatest proponents of metaphysics ever, and he was heavily influenced by Aristotelian thought. He was a great thinker. But what I wanted to talk about and why I brought him here is because he mentions in his writings on being and essence that humans are matter and form composites. So, like I was saying, kind of the matter. You can think of the matter as your physiology, your body, and the form would be what makes you human, what your experience and your kind of being and whatness, and that these are inseparable. But what I think is really interesting about this is that it directly addresses kind of that issue of separation of those theories of emotion, because again, we don't you don't have that in your mind and then that affects your matter. No, they're intricately linked. And it's very short-sighted to say that our thoughts and emotions as humans are experienced simply as just some sum of chemical reactions. But it's also, equally ignorant to say that those chemical reactions aren't part of our emotional response and us, being humans and the experience that we have when we are stressed and when we're anxious. So there's two sides to it, and it's not that one is controlling the other, uh, or that one is kind of has superiority over the other. No, there are two ways of looking at it because they both address a certain aspect of us. And the thing is, you just can't separate those. Is the only problem. So this is kind of a diagram to show that those chemicals in our mind, right? That's a typical, you could think of that as like a reductionist viewpoint. Okay, there's chemicals in our mind. You have different neurotransmitters binding to our synapses, and you get a response. You get, you see something with your eyes, you get chemical release in the ocular portion, sorry, not ocular, the occipital lobe. You're going to act on the hypothalamus. That's going to act on pituitary. You can trace this all the way to that cortical stress response. But that's not everything. But I do want to stress that it's important that while that's not everything, because we have a mind, you also can't take the other approach and say that, well, it's just something in your mind, that you see something and you as a human think, oh my gosh, I'm scared, and there's no chemical response involved. No, we're human, we're matter and form, and so that matter and form are completely linked. We can't separate the two. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in this presentation. I brought in some philosophy because I think it's very important to the understanding of who we are. And I wanted to focus on that idea of matter form composite because that's going to change how we treat things. Like Oliver Sacks, he treats, in a sense, through that same kind of composite of mind, body, matter, form being intricately one. You have to treat both the mind through that 3-month regime that he does with Witty Ticky Ray, but you also have to treat the body because it's foolish to imagine that either one or the other is the only thing that you have to focus on. So, and this is kind of the culmination of this, is that it's important to view both of these for what they're worth, and not to focus on one without thinking about the other. And so, obviously, there's a big allure towards reductionism. It tells you a lot, and I think that's why there's such allure because you can. You can know things. You can say, okay, well, if someone is feeling stressed, you can measure physically that there's higher cortisol. But it's also important, to examine the mind. But when you do that, it's important. I think it's vitally necessary that you keep both of them kind of in this balance. Reductionism is not the enemy to, like humanism or the idea of like being a good person and being able to treat your patients. Reductionism isn't the enemy of that. It's only becomes the enemy when you refuse to look at the person both in their experience as well. So finally, I want to wrap this up quickly with a little bit of a meme and what this tells us. So you can see the meme here. And what I thought was interesting about this is the personification of the brain cells. I think it's so typical of kind of the reductionist viewpoint that we have of like the two brain cells, but at them as people, as their own thing. Like, it wasn't me, it was just my brain cells. So that kind of tells you a little bit about, the field and what we're working with. Anyway, that's my presentation. Thank you for watching.